I have to talk to parents in this state and say, your goal right now is to alleviate all the pain in your kids. But what that actually does is it creates very fragile, low competency, low confident children. How do you step back from pain and trust something outside of yourself?
Having empathy and understanding that people have lives outside of work is really important. It's okay to say, my dog died, or my mom died, or I had a really bad day, or I'm just not feeling it today, or I was up all night with my newborn. Life happens outside of the hours of work.
So, if there's an option in the future to mitigate pain and sadness and maximize pleasure and happiness just by the push of a button, let's just say, what is going to cause our kids and our spouses and society to not push that button? And I think what we need to do is we need to give them a better vision of the purpose and meaning of pain.
I've been wrestling with this idea of as we move higher up in leadership, is that something that's sustainable over a really long period of time, or is that something that needs to be seasonal?
When emotion comes, it comes, and it's okay. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that we're real. And if you're able to show your realness and your emotions to other people, it means that you feel safe and that you trust them.
Having my kids watch the Artemis spaceship and having them see how big the universe is, I want them to see awe and wonder in the world, and that there is so much beauty to explore and exciting things ahead, and that they have the power and potential to create in the future beauty and goodness and love and life. Hey everybody, welcome to the Whole Future Podcast. We created this to help you as a leader and your family remain whole, connected, and grounded in the age of AI and what's coming in the future. We're going to talk about recent stats around work, money, health, family, and leadership. But I want to kick off the show with my co-creator. We are missing Max Hansen today. He will be back on the next episode. But we do have Jared Credit, president and owner of K2 Electric. Jared, welcome back.
What's up, Andy?
And now our featured guest for this episode, Kim Davids. Kim is a great friend of mine. She's also the president and CEO of Arizona Builders Alliance. And she has really been focused the last decade on making an impact in the Arizona construction landscape. I'm excited to hear her perspective and her thoughts today. Kim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so one of the questions I love to ask right out of the gate on this podcast is, what is one big question that you've been asking yourself or others? One amazing quote that I heard this last week on a podcast was, a question well phrased is an answer half given. And I love that idea because when we ask good questions, we have unique insights that we get. And I think all of the great discoveries and innovations in life come from people starting off by asking really big and robust questions. So, Jared, I'm going to start with you. What is one question you've been asking yourself or others in life? And it could be one that you've already stated, and you just give us an update on how that's going.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Got a new one again this week. A life contemplation question. I've been wrestling with this idea of as we move higher up in leadership, is that something that's sustainable over a really long period of time, or is that something that needs to be seasonal? And why I'm asking that is I've got certain buckets of things I like to accomplish and do and put energy into, but I go into these sprint seasons at work and things have to drop. And so just wrestling with an old notion, which was do this for a long time, run a company, and just switching to this is something that has to be more seasonal to ultimately give my best in that, but then give my best in other areas.
One of the things that I've been asking myself is, it's a unique question, but it really made me think this last week, is if my life were a story, is it a story worth telling? And that really sparks for me this idea of, am I doing big things in life? Am I putting myself out there? Am I living a life that is admirable? Am I living a story that my kids would want to tell, that it's worth telling? And I think sometimes I really have to think about that because I don't want to play it safe. I want to play it big and I want to do meaningful, impactful things, meaningful connection in my life. And I do want it to be a story that other people want to tell because it has a lot of meaning and impact attached to it. Kim, how about you?
This is a very interesting question. Timely for me, definitely been an interesting start to the year. I lost my mom about a month ago, and I lost my dad 15 years ago. And anytime when you lose a loved one, it just makes you take inventory on life, on what matters, what doesn't, and just looking ahead to what I want the rest of my career to look like and my life to look like. Definitely want to have an impact, definitely on the construction industry, but also to those who matter to me. I don't have kids. To me, I surround myself with friends and other various people in the industry and that I've connected with throughout the last several years of my career. And it just really makes you look around and just appreciate, have gratitude for who's there, the connections that you've made, and then really mourn the loss of those who are no longer here, and also friendships and seasons that have sunset. And it's okay. Life is not meant to be on one continued trajectory. And so, really wrestling with the fact that there's a lot of twists and turns and ups and downs. And today's conversation around human connection and happiness and suffering and all the things that I'm looking forward to, I don't know, just expounding on, because I think that as we grow in our careers and in our lives and in our families, we just constantly think that and it's just uphill and it's success. And it's not always that. It's more about the impact you're making, maybe on the person who served you your coffee that day or somebody. It's just the small shifts, not the global shifts. And I think my the question I'm asking is, how on the impact level, does it have to be big, or can it just be that I complimented somebody today and made a difference in their life? So it's not about these grandiose ideas. It's relishing in the small and the simple moments of life.
Let's jump in right to our first topic, which is Neuralink. So I'm going to start off with some stats and some new news about that. So with Neuralink, there's a patient named Kenneth Schock. This was a YouTube video that was going around recently. But Kenneth Schock was an ALS patient. He received a Neuralink transplant. And what was amazing was he had this ability. He lost his ability to speak. And now, if you watch the video, he can think the words and the computer will say those words out loud. So he's really regained his ability to speak. And this chip interprets his brain signals into text, allowing a computer to connect his thoughts into spoken words without any movement. So, pretty crazy technology. And I just want to go through some of the brain changes history here. So, in 1998 was the first human BCI implant, and BCI stands for brain computer interface. So, that's bidirectionally. So, it can both read the brain signals, but it can also read signals back into the brain. Neuralink's first human implant was in 2024, so really not that long ago. And I think a lot of us remember when Neuralink came online and when they had their first implant. And they had this patient called Noland, and he could play chess, he could browse the web, he can control his phone hands free just by using his brain. And in 2026, Neuralink plans 79 of these human implants this year with the big goal of bringing back people who are blind to be able to have sight, which is pretty crazy. So, what I want to do is I just want to start there on the advancements in this form of technology and just get your insights into this whole concept of bringing back movement, mobility, sight, things that we thought were gone forever. A chip that's able to go into the brain and both take data, but also implant data to be able to create movement and all of these fantastic things. What are your 2 cents on this?
I'll go. I think it's incredible. I think we're gonna talk about some potential scary downside in a second, but based on that, those use cases, I think it's remarkable and could be just unbelievably life changing for a lot of people. And I think a lot of these topics we touch on, this is the great question: is what's the split point, which we'll talk about in a second. But in terms of that, in terms of helping folks that have had demonstrable different, I guess I would say, I don't want to say negative. I know people adapt, but just that capacity to see or to communicate when you haven't been able to, I think that's remarkable. And it's a great advancement in science and technology.
Yeah, I agree. It's when you read the stats, you're like, wow, that stuff has been from however many years ago where we started and where the technology is today. I think those who have been born with whatever kind of disadvantage, the fact that we have made leaps and bounds to either reverse or correct or enhance their experience in life is really profound. But again, at what cost on the other side of the technology, right?
I think pacemakers were the first time when
Yeah.
we did something inside of someone that had electrical signals that can control the rhythm and the beat of the heart that were really helpful to many people. And same with Neuralink, they're going after major medical conditions right now. But this really opened up in my mind this idea of if we're able to both communicate, take data from the brain, but also communicate data into it, we have the potential for power to change the mood states in the brain. We already can do that through our neural synapses, through our dopamine, serotonin receptors. But I was talking to Claude about this and I was getting some perspective. And here's what they talked about. So I just want to share this slide. So if you play this out on the way that technology is going, what this shows is that in 2028, you could have this concept if you have these brain devices to treat broken emotions. So there could be deep brain stimulation and a closed loop device that interrupts depression, anxiety, and OCD signals. So a lot of these emotions and trapped kind of mental processes around anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, OCD are related to neurochemical imbalances. And some of those chemicals are electrical and some of them are chemical. But in 2028 to 2032, there is this idea of what if you could read both those emotional states and write into those emotional states. And what's fascinating about this, if you play this out, is if we could modulate emotions in the brain, my question for you two is if we could stop the feeling of sadness and amplify the feeling of joy just by a neural implant, which will be likely in the next 10 to 20 years. Would you do that? And if not, why?
I think if you go back to the Stoics and all the different theologians from the years past, where through suffering comes joy, right? And how can you actually truly enjoy or feel happiness without going through suffering? When you're going through it, I sprained my ankle the other day and I'm so angry at myself, right? It was a slip up and whatnot. And it's a reset and it's painful and it's slowing me down. But I know that it's something that I need to do and that I need to figure it out. And at the end of the day, right, is it debilitating? No. Do I know I'm going to heal? Absolutely. But if I were to just complete, never get hurt, never have pain, never have suffering, I wouldn't truly understand the experience. There's a quote from a book and it's called Experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted. Now, when life just happens and everything just comes your way, you're just kind of, I don't know, I feel like there's just like a baseline, but when you can feel the wave of emotions, both highs and lows, I really do think that's the essence of life. Now, do the lows suck? Absolutely. But I do think that they make you appreciate the happiness and the joy and find the gratitude over the long term.
Yeah, to your base question, would I? I don't see that I would. I think the to Kim's point, the high highs, the joys that you can feel in life, often my feeling is that the extreme good out of that comes from the juxtaposition to the low lows, right? So I don't know that to me it would like I feel like it would neutralize everything into this kind of middle ground stable state where it's very flat. And that doesn't sound very enjoyable. Plus, I know for myself, especially when I was younger, a little bit less so now, but I was pretty independent minded and it usually took pain to help me learn and grow. Right. And so I would have lost a lot of that without feeling sadness or anxiety. And there's still some of that today. Through some of that, I've learned to listen to other people a little bit more, but still, I learned very much by downside experiences of okay, now what am I going to do differently? And so I think if I mitigated that, my motivation to make a change would be a lot lower.
I think a case study is American society and culture. We have the most opportunity in the entire world to outsource and alleviate our pain whenever and however we want to. We can do it through buying things, we can do it through medical interventions, we can do it through social interventions. And we have this possibility where we do, I think, especially for leaders, they like this dopamine hit of excitement, pleasure, passion, drive, and they try to minimize pain or discomfort or feeling stuck. But what does the research actually reveal on this? That American society has the highest rates of suicidal ideation. Are We have the highest rates of depression and anxiety that continue to increase. So as we pursue abundance around pleasure and the avoidance of pain, and we outsource that, it's actually not making us happier. And I think that's an odd concept for a lot of leaders and families that I sit with is when we start talking about their kids and they have, by all means, every opportunity to alleviate the depression, anxiety, the social stress. They can use their money, use their time, use their connections to get their kids into any therapist they ever want, any modality, any intervention. And to some degree, I have to talk to parents in this state and say, your goal right now is to alleviate all the pain in your kids. But what that actually does is it creates very fragile, low competency, low confident children. How do you step back from pain and trust something outside of yourself, which is really what you have to do? You have to trust something outside of yourself, that the pain that is going on inside of your spouse, inside of your kids, inside of your employees, inside of your co-founders is meant to do a work to mature us and refine us. And when we step in and we alleviate that pain so fast, we actually mitigate, we stop the growth and development that is occurring. Like you said, Jared, I know some people in my life, the pain has to get high enough to make a choice to want to change. So, another one of my questions is why in American society, especially within leaders, because both of you are in YPO, you know a lot of leaders, you are leaders. Why do leaders have a propensity to chase pleasure, passion, drive, freedom, and traditionally avoid uncomfortable emotions like sadness?
I think it's the first thing that comes to mind for me is it's not unique to leaders. It's just the opportunities there. The resources are there. I think most humans are in pursuit of making things easier, making things more comfortable. I think that's what we've progressively done as humans. I think the thing for leaders oftentimes is they just have the resources to go harder and faster with that option. So I think that more than anything is probably why you see a concentration of it there.
For people who want to solve everything, right? We're solvers, we're leaders, we own businesses, we run businesses, and we're used to our entire lives solving the problem and people coming to you and wanting a solution. But sometimes you need to let people come up with their own solution and ask them rather than have me solve it for you, what do you bring to the table? And I think in a society where like the instant gratification, right? Everybody wants word. We look at social media and we want the likes and we want the hits and we want all the things. It's okay to not have the answer right now. It's okay to not know the answer and to seek it out. But I think when people are used to being a solver, it's hard. It's like that. There's a book, what got you here won't get you there. There's a pivotal point where you stop solving the actual problem and you have to help other people manage those people solve the problem, and they may not manage it the same way that you do. They probably won't ever do it the same way that you do, and maybe they'll do it better, maybe they'll do it worse, but it you need to let them grow. And I think same thing with kids, right? You want to make sure that they're going to grow up with the best of the best, or maybe what you didn't have, and you're going to fix things from your childhood. And then life gets in the way, and all of a sudden you're like, how did we get here? When it's not going to be solved with the car when they turn 16 and the Ivy League college degree, all the things, right? People are people and they're nuanced. And it's hard to watch other people go through hardship, right? We want to help, we want to step in. And I think just as leaders, we're built that way. But at the end of the day, I think and I just think it's human nature, right? You want to help people, you want to step in, whether you're a leader or you're not. But the propensity to want to solve it, whether you have $1 million or $1, right? The issues still remain about human life and human suffering and wanting to make sure you can help people not suffer for as long as, they're in it, right?
I think another component, Andy, is like kind of the time hack component. And one of the challenges of a system of capitalism is there's always someone that's pushing harder, faster, right? There's always this pressure of doing more. Well, out of that, I think about for myself, the best way I can get out of a funk is like sit in nature and be quiet and be still. That takes a lot of time. Like when I go on a family vacation, it takes me 2 or 3 days to decompress into it. So rather than take 2 to 3 days to come out of the funk or the anxiety or the depression, what's something I can do that can happen in 20 minutes, 30 minutes? How do I accelerate through this? So I think it's also trying to cheat things from a time standpoint.
So if there's an option in the future to mitigate pain and sadness and maximize pleasure and happiness just by the push of a button, let's just say, what is going to cause our kids and our spouses and society to not push that button? And I think what we need to do is we need to give them a better vision of the purpose and meaning of pain. And I don't think we've done a good job of that. I don't think we've outlined what is the purpose of pain. Actually, what we've done is we've taught people that you're supposed to suppress it, you're supposed to push it away, you're supposed to push it down. And this is why I spent this last year, and I've sent this to a couple different people, building out really my manifesto or my basically a one pager on what is the purpose and meaning of pain in my life. I had to define what is the goodness attached to this. And I am a strong believer that pain is the pathway to life. And specifically with sadness, there are no bad emotions. There's just ones that are more uncomfortable than others. And that's important to know that sadness and fear and anger are not bad emotions. They're just maybe emotions you are uncomfortable with because you either saw them displayed poorly or you were never taught properly about them. But here's really the definition of sadness and why it's important. Sadness is meant to cause us to slow down, reflect, and connect with those we love. It is the predominant emotion that breeds connection and makes us release oxytocin, the bonding chemical when we're with others. And it causes us to slow down and just pause and go, hold on a second. Let me ask some bigger questions right now that I haven't asked myself in a while. Anger, fear, joy, and some of these other emotions don't really do that. They have other purposes. So if we lose the ability for sadness, we really lose the ability for human authentic connection, and we lose the ability to be wise, thoughtful, reflective human beings. So I think over time, we're going to have to give each other a big vision around the purpose and meaning of pain and sadness. And even on our teams and our leadership teams and companies, really being able to actually have pain as a metric of success, that pain is an opportunity for growth. And instead of seeing pain as an enemy that we need to get away from, how do we see it as an ally, as a coach that is trying to do something in you to make you a better person, try to make us better as a team? How do we lean into that, be shaped by that, rather than trying to just get beyond it? So, any other thoughts on that specific concept? Otherwise, we're going to move on to humanoids.
At the beginning of that, you asked a question, and I think it's a super important one: is what can we do as leaders with our family, with folks that we lead? And I think like you nailed it in the way you described it, which is you need to normalize these emotions that aren't comfortable. You need to first model that, hey, I feel sad. Here's why I feel sad. So you yourself acknowledging emotions, naming that emotions they're just a reality, right? They're not inherently bad. There's some that don't feel good. And then encouraging others to do that work. I think that is with my children, that's something that when they're going through something, is trying to get to not what happened, although that's part of it, right? But what are you feeling? Because that helps me. The whole YPO model is actually built on this. I can't really understand what an impact is for you, Andy, or for you, Kim, until you tell me the emotion tied to it. Because you could just tell a statement and I might think you're angry, but really you're sad, right? And so until you actually do the work, get into the emotion, which is then cathartic for you. And something we do internally, especially if we're going to go into like bigger, longer meetings, especially where emotions might get high, is at the beginning of the meeting, we use an emotions worksheet. And it's just, hey, name the top 2 to 3 that you're feeling. So now everybody in the room has context for where everybody's at, what they're showing up in this room with. But it's also normalizing, hey, we all have emotions and this is perfectly acceptable. So I think that's the starting point to counteract this potential future desire to go, no, I want to just put the device in my brain. I want to be able to click the button and skip all that.
Same here. Jared, we do the same thing. I think the having empathy and understanding that people have lives outside of work is really important. It's okay to say my dog died or my mom died or I had a really bad day or I'm just not feeling it today or I was up all night with my newborn. Life happens outside of the hours of work and it's not an excuse, but I think it makes people relatable and if they can explain right within reason and all the things, but really to be able to articulate and there's when my mom died, I came to work and it was still pretty raw and I was recounting some of the situation and one of my employees was like, "Wow, you know what? You're human." And I took a step back and I sometimes I always feel like I need to be on and I need to be this poised person. And when emotion comes, it comes and it's okay. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that we're real. And if you're able to show your realness and your emotions to other people, it means that you feel safe and that you trust them. And I think that just breeds more relationship growing throughout the process. And I think it's okay to talk about the emotions and it's imperative to grow that connection as you move forward.
It's important, I think, just a little education here on the word emotion comes from the Latin emovere, which means to move out. So emotion is not really meant to be stored and stuffed. It's meant to be expressed, communicated in a healthy way. And movere means to move the emotion out. And the word motivation actually comes from the word emotion. It has the same Latin origin. So when we think about motivating our teams and our people and our kids, you cannot have motivation without having emotion heightened. That is the most important thing to remember, that if you want to suppress emotion, you will lose your drive, you will lose your passion, your spark, your motivation. So if we want people to have intrinsic motivation, we have to teach them how to connect with emotion, how to use emotion, how to identify and communicate it. And the other thing, Jared, what you talked about around this question off the front end of, am I as a leader meant to do this for 40 years or am I meant to go in kind of these stints? I think the cool thing about AI and what's coming in the future, most leaders don't do this because they're so tapped out and there's so many people they're leading and there's so many different things and people's names and stories and life and they can't wrap their arms around all that. I do think the future is built around smaller teams. I think instead of 10 people doing 10 things, you're going to have two people do those 10 things with a lot of tools attached to it, maybe not in the construction space off the front end, but eventually. And I do think that will create opportunity for more human connection and less focus on optimization, efficiency, speed, which will be outsourced to AI and humanoid robotics and other things. So I think there's hope for the future around connection is going to be a vital thing in the future. I think emotions are going to be a vital thing. And I think we're going to have the time and opportunity to maybe invest in some of that more with smaller teams. Okay, let's move on to humanoid robots. This is one that's just fun for me. As soon as these things come out, I want to get one from my house and test it out. Wow, but I love technology, and this is just fascinating for me. So let's get into some of the recent state data on this. And this will be interesting, I think, I want to hear your perspectives, both Kim and Jared, on this coming from the construction space and manufacturing space is Elon Musk ends the production of the Tesla Model S and X, which is a bummer because I have an X and now I'm thinking, how longer is this going to last? But he converted that whole Fremont factory to create 1 million Optimus robots a year. Now with Tesla, a lot of investors in Tesla and elsewhere have been saying that in 5 years, Tesla will no longer be known as a electric vehicle company. That is how big of a shift with XAI, with SpaceX, with Optimus, that they're really moving away from vehicles and they're moving into humanoids. So Jeff Bezos is said to have been raising or seeking to raise 100 billion to buy manufacturing companies and automate them with AI. Barclays projects that physical AI market, machines that can sense, decide, and act in the real world, could reach 1.4 trillion by 2035. So huge market numbers here. And then China, which is the leading expert in this technology and as humanoids, has 140 plus humanoid robotic companies, which is absolutely wild, with 330 different models. Now, I just want to pause here before we go into kind of the stats on the cost of everything exponentially dropping and talk potential of humanoid robots in the construction space and in factories, because I do think that's the first place they're going to go is into autonomous factory settings. How is that going to impact the US economy? How's that going to impact the way we think about work and what we outsource? I would love your two perspective in regards to your industries.
So I think he named two different industries, manufacturing and construction. So I think, and your stats kind of show this, manufacturing is way more likely. Robotics have been heavy in manufacturing for a long time. The shift potentially is as opposed to the robotics being programmed to do one specific thing in a repeated way, it has the capability, and which ultimately probably just expands what it can do within the plant. You can use robots for more things in the plant, but the outcomes in a manufacturing plant are tend to be, especially a well organized one, tend to be a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like I'm making this exact product and I'm going to make it. That's the whole, go back to Henry Ford, right? He brought the cost of the vehicle down because other people were making vehicles. He just brought the cost way down because he systematized the way that everything moved through. So it sped everything up. Juxtaposed with construction, where there's some robotics. I think blockies have some tools. I've seen like a paint robot where we can paint. And you talk to people that use them and they're marginally helpful and maybe the core high production 70, 80%. But when you get into the finish work and the fine endpoints of, oh, I got to have a cut point here where it's got to be exact. That's where so far it's not there. And the other thing is like, how quickly can that tool adapt to the changes at the job site, which are more frequent than we would like to see, and actually more so today. I think it's most people in our industry would say it's gotten worse because we're pushing schedules faster. So we're actually starting projects before there's actually a complete idea of what's going to be built. There's like a good idea, but it's not a complete idea. And so as you're building the project and designing it at the same time, it creates these adjustments, which is a little bit harder to adapt, I think, for robotics. So go to China and places where they're taking an apartment complex and they're modularizing it and they just stack them up. Their willingness is to have the exact same building go over and over again. You don't see that in the US. A tilt slab industrial building that is very utilitarian, doesn't really have an aesthetic need. Still, if you look at them, every single one looks different, right? Somebody wants to put their touch on it. And so I think it's a mind shift that's going to have to happen ultimately to create more uniformity.
You think the aesthetics will change to, like what you're saying, uniformity? If we want to go this autonomous route, it's going to lose some of the human creative touch.
I think it would accelerate. And now with there could still be an inflection point just further out where the robotics technology then can adapt to those changes and the way you feed it in. But I think you could accelerate it if you were to standardize a little bit more on the final build.
Yeah, my mind went right to modular, right? Like a hotel or a dorm room, right, where you have multiple rooms and the exact same thing. You can do a pod of a bathroom or a shell of a room, and that is where the manufacturing, it's built off site and then it's pulled in, or it's built on site and so there's that assembly line. Right now, I think the robots could be really good for that. But yeah, when there's a lot of different nuances and a lot of flair and architectural to a building, it's a lot harder to continue. How would that robotic get programmed to understand what the different changes are and the rapid pace of construction? But yeah, definitely on some of the more modular aspects, I think we're there from that perspective where it could really prove beneficial. But again, it has to be more repetitive, systematic, not a lot of variation amongst the final product for sure.
I think in the future, and we're seeing this with Amazon drivers, where they are basically tracking everything that Amazon drivers do with probably the intention of replacing what they do with AI and humanoids. Because if you can have an individual, if you can download all of the knowledge skill set and you can have someone wear a suit essentially and map their movements and visual contact and everything with cameras and movement and everything over a year period, over a massive amount of the workforce in different construction companies or manufacturing companies. And the humanoids learn based on that real world example. So you're basically, the crazy thing about this is we're using humans to train robots. We're using the human worker who will essentially in some ways be extinct to train the humanoid that's going to take over those jobs. And I do think that's going to cause some upheaval and some pushback when people realize, oh, you're making me wear a suit to track my movement. What does this mean for my job? And questions like that. To me, one of the most fascinating things around all this is the cost of things dropping. And I want to show some data on this, specifically as it relates to the humanoid robots. Goldman Sachs found that manufacturing costs for a humanoid robot dropped roughly 40% between 2022 and 2023 alone, from a range of 50,000 to 250,000 down to 30 to 150,000. The Optimus robot is slated to be, I think, $30,000 or so with a monthly membership that you can do. But China's Unitree launched a fully humanoid robot in July for just nearly $6,000 less than a used car. So, a couple categories where we see this drop in cost, which is crazy to me. So, 98% drop in inference cost around tokens between 2022 and 2025. EV battery costs between the last 10 years, 2010 to 2022, have dropped 89%. Utility solar has dropped 82%. Humanoid robot costs, 71%. And space launch costs per kilogram have dropped 75%. So it used to be 10,000 and now it's 2,500 per kilogram. And then the target is $10 to $100 per kilogram. So if we can get all this down, it's absolutely crazy. Now, with the cost dropping, we also have other things increasing in cost. So home prices are up 44%, auto insurance is up 38%, energy costs is up 32%, eating out, childcare, groceries, healthcare, rent, college tuition, all of these are going up at an exponential level. So what you have here is everything that's tied to technology and automation and AI is dropping exponentially. When it ties to human labor, it continues to go up. So, what does this mean for us in our idea of like abundance and the flourishing of the future? When human costs and having humans in the loop is just exponentially more expensive, to me, this is fascinating. And it's amazing that technology can drop at a cost that to that degree. What does this mean for us, workplaces and our homes, in society and our economy?
I think there's an element of this that's not new, right? Technology's always had this from the start of the computer, but if you go back to the industrial age, right? So technology's always been doing this. These numbers might be faster and greater. I don't know the data. So that playbook has been seen before. I think the question is, can this run all the way to the point that it eliminates the need for a human, which no other technology has done that. What's happened in the past is it just opens up avenues to go put humans into the things that only humans can do in that given moment in time. So I think if we eliminate the need for humans, and we've talked about that before on this show, that's the part that strikes a little bit of fear in me, because purpose and what do you go do, and just how do the economics of that work when humans aren't providing a product or service and therefore getting an income back from providing that product or service. How does that economically work? So I don't know, probably more questions for me than anything on this.
As these costs drive up around healthcare and eating out and education, which education is a whole conversation because the exponential rate of what education has cost over the last 10 years and I would say the value add that has changed is minimal or zero. That education has really gotten better for the degree of the cost. And you think about food, humanoid robots farming food or creating food for us to increase our abundance. A lot of the categories that were actually increased on cost could actually go down through AI, healthcare, transportation, some of these other things, energy use.
So a couple of years ago, we had Pierre Diamandis come to a YPO event and talked all about this. He said, in the next 5 years, which it was a couple of years ago, people are going to have humanoids in their homes and for less than 10 grand. So here we are, right? And I'm going to call mine Rosie just because of the Jetsons. So whenever I get mine, that's going to be her name. And the concept was that people won't have to work and because the cost of things will go down. But where does that shift? You already mentioned it, purpose, right? People, when they retire, if they don't have a purpose, if they don't have a calling, something that they get up for every single day, and now maybe the purpose will shift over time, right? But we have generations of people that have gotten up, they've gone to work day in and day out, some at the same place for the 40 years. Now, that's obviously shifted into the Gen Z and whatnot. But at the end of the day, what are people going to get up to do? to hang out with their humanoid? Are they, I don't know. It's a shift. It's a huge culture shift, but I'm like Jared, there's a lot more questions that I have around it than I guess who would have thought that we all would have had a computer walking around with us in our iPhones one day. I still remember AOL dial up. That's how old I am. It's just crazy to look at what technology and the advancements that we're going to get, but to actually reduce the cost of everything to where humans don't have to work anymore. That's an interesting concept. Work is such an identifying brand recognition for so many people. When you take that out of the equation, what's left?
Two problematic things I see with humanoids. I see a lot of benefits. I see a lot of beautiful things attached to them. Here are two things that I foresee are going to happen inside of families and with leaders. You have a humanoid robot in your home, your kids name it, they spend time with it, they ask it questions, it becomes a part of the family like an animal. What happens when you have to upgrade that humanoid and you have to
Mm,
get that humanoid and get a new one? Even though maybe it remembers everything, there's something that kids remember that they attach to something like a
mm,
snuggie or a pet or a thing. Kids don't like change like that. And when you have something so integrated into your home that literally looks like a human, kids will build attachment with these things. What does that mean for breaking that attachment with them when we have to upgrade them and downgrade them and all of these different things? The other issue that I see is that if we don't treat them with, for lack of better words, with respect or care or integrity, what does it mean for a kid to just trash this thing or for humans and adults to just knock it over, push it over, cuss at it, yell at it, treat it like a piece of trash because it's not human? In a way, it looks
mm.
human. So we're priming our brain to behave in a way towards a humanoid, which is looking more and more like a human in an aggressive manner. How does that translate then how we treat people? We're priming ourselves. So there's like a bifurcation. You treat it like a machine and you just treat it like trash, like a machine. But then that primes our mind to treat potentially humans that similar way, or you treat it with more dignity, respect. I don't even want to say the word dignity. I think respect or care or um, stewardship, but then you build attachment with it. To me, those are very problematic philosophical and family questions that we're going to have to address, especially around this idea of kids building attachments with these humanoids.
And even as to the point of how the humanoid responds, right? When you first started typing and people said, greet it, hello, how are you today? Actually talk to it like it's a person because it can then start humanizing itself, right? So if you start disrespecting your robot, what's the consequence on the flip side, right?
Yeah, I don't never really contemplated that. I can think of kind of some, but I don't know, a lot of different things come to mind. I think about a vehicle, right? It's pretty utilitarian, and some people name them. And there is actually, I've cycled through vehicles and I'm like, huh, it takes me like an hour. I'm like, all right, I'm over it. But there's that, oh man, that thing treated me well. But at the end of the day, it was a hunk of metal. And so I'm on to the next one. Similar for kids. There's still a lot of tech type things in the home already that maybe, so I'd have to think about that one more of working them through that of how challenging that would be. But this concept of treating it as less than for thousands and thousands of years, humans have done that to other humans. Racism, slavery, still prevalent. So I don't think that's a new problem. I think it's just another opportunity. You do need to distinguish this is not a human, because I think that's important when you think about human connection and the importance that's going to have. But also just like,
Well, to understand that when it talks like a human, moves like a human, and eventually wears clothes, you can buy clothes for your human. There are too many human features for it to tell kids like this is not a human because they're going to pick up on all the cues that this is doing human like things.
yeah,
It's going to be very confusing for kids.
yeah,
So there are some complexities with this. What I think, going back to costs, is this idea of abundance. And I want to look at the next slide here. To me, this is what everyone is preaching and going for. And this is why there's such a massive push right now, is this idea of abundance. And these are three quotes that Elon Musk has said. Basically, if you want something, you can just have it. Essentially, AI and robotics will drop the cost of goods and services to almost nothing. There will be universal high income and not universal basic income. universal high income. There will be no shortage of goods or services. Ultimately, I think the only scarcity that will exist will be scarcity that we just decide to create artificially or something like a unique piece of art. Now, when I thought about this, the first thing that my head went to was there will be scarcity because Earth only has so many resources. So, how can we have whatever we want, whenever we want, however we want, when resources are limited? When I got into this last week, the concept of space, this idea of abundance completely unlocked for me. I was like, oh, wow, this is a possibility. And it made sense of how this becomes a possibility. So we're going to actually pivot away from abundance and talk about how we get there by talking about space. And one really fun thing that's happening this week as we talk is this idea of the Artemis 2 spaceship. So the Artemis 2 launched on April 1st, sending 4 astronauts on a 10-day flyby around the moon, the first crewed mission beyond low Earth orbit since Apollo 17 in 1972. In 2028, NASA plans to go back and actually build a long term strategy on the moon to have a base. I sat down with my kids. We actually watched the launch last night because they hadn't seen it. And then we watched a bunch of other videos on space and the moon and everything. And it was just absolutely fascinating. If you've seen photos today or yesterday of the backside of the moon that we have not really seen before, it is beautiful. Just the fact that humans can do these kinds of things is fascinating to me. But this is really the big unlock. But just right off the front, like us going back to the moon and building a lunar, basically a space station on the moon, what are your thoughts on that before we get into that even deeper?
I don't know. It's hard for me because I previewed the slide deck, Andy. So most of my thoughts are newly formed around your next slide. Because I guess my initial thought, I was like, oh, I hadn't really looked into it. I was like, oh, that's cool that we're back at the moon, but
I
that was about it.
just think, I just think for kids, they need these kinds of things to be able to look at and have awe and wonder of where humans can go. And our venturing out into space, I would say, is the next kind of unlock for humanity for these resources. So maybe let's just get into this and then we can talk more about this. So some really fascinating things about an unlock in space. In order to have abundance, space needs to take place because the moon. So here's some really interesting things about the moon. The moon's lunar gravity is 1/6 of that of Earth. There's zero atmospheric drag, and the escape velocity is 2.4 kilometers per second. Now, that's 78% lower than Earth. There's an abundance of resources actually on the moon, like helium, oxygen, titanium, rare earth that powers EVs, wind turbines, electronics, iron, aluminum, silicon, and then silica, which we'll talk about in a little bit. To me, what I think is fascinating about this is if there's 1/6 the atmosphere or 1/6 the gravitational pull, 0% atmospheric kind of resistance, what you can do is you can actually create a sled, electromagnetic sled that you mine resources on the moon and you essentially shoot them towards Earth. And you don't need any propulsion in order to do this. So, this is a massive unlock. If we can build spaces on the moon and actually start to manufacture in the moon, getting resources back to Earth is a lot easier than getting off of Earth into space because we need so much propulsion. If you look at the rocket ship Artemis 2, these massive engines getting it out of Earth's atmosphere because of the gravitational pull, but from the moon, you essentially launch it, you get it up to speed, escape velocity, and you shoot it, and it can land anywhere on Earth that you ask it to land. And it moves through and it has to go through Earth's atmosphere. So it has to be protected enough to go through that heat system. But this is a massive unlock because the moon has so many resources. And if we could mine those resources and find ways to get them to Earth faster and quicker, this would unlock a lot of that idea of abundance.
As we think about abundance and you hear about people living to 200 or living forever and whatnot, running out of space, and what does that look like? And are we all like the population and whatnot? This could go down so many avenues of discussion, but it's wild what we're uncovering, a whole new planet to house on, right? And to work through and to help make us whole and are lacking in resources, the abundance. It's unworldly to think of, at least from my perspective.
Because to get to abundance, it is abundance of resources in order to create abundance. And especially silica, and just this last slide, and then we'll talk about it. When you look at asteroid mining, which we will eventually do, there are a couple different types of asteroids. There's C type, there's S type, there's M type metallic, and then there's other types. The M type metallic has platinum, nickel, iron, gold, and cobalt. And the estimated value of a single M type asteroid is $10 quadrillion. There is so much resources and minerals. And the other thing that is abundant on these asteroids is silica. And silica is very important for us around microchips, solar panels, glass and fiber optics, concretes and ceramics, and in space manufacturing. So, silica is a very important chemical or compound that we need. But the other unlock here is okay, if I go into my human brain, I'm like, we'll run out of these resources, but AI is actually going to solve math and science where it's going to create new chemical compounds that are stronger than concrete and steel. It's going to create new chemical compounds that last longer than anything we have on Earth. That there is this idea of creating new things that have not been created from the raw materials that actually last longer, have more abundance attached to them. So to me, this was the unlock for me on where we go then, and gave me the vision of why space is so important for both energy from the sun, but also minerals and resources. And if in 10 years we can unlock some of that, I do think this idea of universal abundance is a possibility. I would love your guys' thoughts because this was a massive unlock for me.
Yeah, same. When I saw it, I was like, wow, had not contemplated that. I read a little bit on solar panels in space and data centers in space. And most of that was framed around energy, right? A more efficient way to get the energy, but the actually grabbing resources out of space, because that's true and that's huge. And you think about EVs versus oil. One of the things with oil is at some point it runs out. So yeah, I think it's crazy. And the first thought I had is, okay, if you have no battle for resources, you do you ever have war again? Because I know there's a base element oftentimes of some disagreements around worldviews, but there's typically some economic component, right? You look at the threat today for the Tuesday deadline is based on opening up the waterway to get oil flowing. If it weren't for that threat would not be there. And yes, there are big worldview disagreements between the US and Israel and Iran, but there's this huge scarcity of resource component that plays into, I'm guessing, almost every war ever. So yeah, you think about elimination of that, and it's just expounding this, I'll call it utopia. It's still not clear to me, like the path there still seems rough, but yeah, that's absolute abundance if you can eliminate the battle for resources, land or food or energy.
From a job standpoint, I actually talked to my kids last night and I said, when you think about jobs in the future, there's going to be a lot of jobs in space. I would actually encourage you to think about, would you want to work off of planet Earth, on the moon, or elsewhere, doing things creative or elsewhere? And that, when you have a whole nother planet you're building infrastructure upon, you do have a lot of jobs that come about by a very competent group of people who know how to venture into space and do work in space. And I think that's a cool kind of a vision to give our kids. It's like, hey, you know, how would you like to work on the moon? What would that look like? How do you start thinking about that now? And like the kids, like wildest dream to think about doing work in space.
Funny. Sorry, I just as you were saying that when we were just talking about the Artemis, I was like, man, how cool would it be to be an astronaut, right? And to sign up for a number of years. And where are we going to be in 10 years where a trip to the moon is like a trip to another continent, right? You don't have to go and sign your life away. It's you could work 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off or something, right? However, what or can we habitat on the moon? Going back to your comment, Jared, full abundance and lack of or abundance and resources, but then right then who owns what, who gets what share, like that introduces a whole other set of who got there first, who owns it, who gets the lion's share of this and or that resource. Obviously, a whole set of problems that we need to solve for once we get there. But it's you just wonder the fair and equitable and what that looks like. from a government perspective.
Yeah, maybe, but if it's abundant beyond any population's ability to
Yeah,
consume it, then does that potentially the control, but like in terms of
yeah,
selection, I don't know if that selection would exist if it truly is beyond the human capability to consume all that is available.
true.
Yeah, it will be fascinating because that K curve of economics of like you can move up to abundance, but then there's a group that misses that opportunity or doesn't have resources and drops back down. And I do think it will require a tremendous amount of intentionality to expel those resources globally and not just think about, and unfortunately, this idea of America first at all costs. It's
Mhm.
America first, maybe, but for the flourishing of others, we need to understand how to continue to build those resources and viability for those who don't have that opportunity. And this would be one of those things, like Kim, you're describing, like there's going to be three main key players, probably. It's probably going to be Russia, China, and the United States that are going to have global space dominance, and there's going to have to be all new politics, and there's so much restriction on earth around construction and how you do things and how it's built, but those don't apply, I don't think, up in space on them, because who runs the real estate of the moon? So I think you can actually build things faster and quicker and move things along because you don't have regulation yet on some of that. Now hopefully we don't blow up the moon, that would be.
That would be good.
Nope.
But it is interesting to understand that, like, space, there's not regulation like there is on Earth yet.
Yeah. It's gonna be like Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this idea of abundance, it's beautiful, but this makes me ask another question, which goes to our next slide on this idea. Okay, if abundance is the reality, what then becomes rare? So in a post-scarcity world, the only scarcity that will exist will be scarcity that we have just decided to create artificially. That's a quote from Elon Musk. So the only scarcity that will exist will be the scarcity that we just decide to create artificially. And I'd love your thoughts on this idea of, and I know the next slide will explain some of this, but if there is abundance of resources, what then becomes rare on Earth? What are the things that we can't just have just by having robots make us more things or bring us more things? What are your thoughts?
Land's the first thing that comes to mind for me because that's so baked that into the whole economic system of the world. Humans have always moved around, and as technology changes, this shifts. But originally, it was like you needed to be around water, or well, pretty much water. You need to be around water. That's where animals are. Everything runs off water. More modern times, it's like what humans perceive as more valuable land, whatever that may be, and some of that's personal preference, right? Do you like the mountains? Do you like the ocean? Do you like, you know, a mild climate, a hot climate, a cold climate? But that's the main thing. I'm sure there's some more, but land is the main thing that comes to mind for me.
The whole concept of farming and food and whatnot, right? We're destroying our soil. The minerals and resources we get from the moon are they're good for certain things here, but we still are half of our food system now is just genetically engineered. And what does that look like? Getting back to basics and wholesome and regenerative farming from that perspective. But I guess when you ask the question, the first thing that when I thought about it was less on a tangible, but more about human connection. And I know from the perspective that's where the conversation had started and is heading. But I think when they can have anything and everything at no cost, right? The experience of just being one with nature or with other people or with themselves, right? In a world where technology is just running rampant, to quiet the mind and really connect with themselves and others and nature.
Yeah. I think if we go to this next slide, some things that are going to be abundant or some things that are going to be rare and scarce are this idea of human creativity of what we choose. Some of that art, music, and writing, but it's got to have a personal story behind it because that's the one thing that can't be replicated is people's personal stories. Authentic human connection, time with people you love. That's not something that humanoids can just automatically create. Jared, you talked about this land and location. So robots could make us anything, but they can't give us an opportunity to have that beachfront property, that penthouse, that place in Tuscany. Like those specific physical spaces, I think are going to stay scarce. This is one that's near and dear to my heart, this idea of meaning and purpose. Elon Musk says if the computer and robots can do everything better than you, does your life have meaning? And I think that's a substantial question that everybody's going to start to ask. This idea of trust is going to be pivotal in a world flooded with a lot of AI generated content. The idea of what can I trust, who can I trust is going to be extremely important. And then time. Still, we live in this world of a 24-hour clock in a day. So, as much as you optimize your life, you still only have 24 hours. I even think with longevity escape velocity around health, and we'll get into this in a couple of weeks when we have someone come on who's a health expert, but we'll talk about freezing our bodies and we'll talk about regenerating our organs and putting new organs in and this longevity escape velocity. You ask most people how long you want to live, and it's usually 120, 150. You don't really hear a lot of people say, I want to live forever. Why do you think people still put a cap on it? If there's a dream of immortality, why do people not want it?
I think the limitation right now is you think about health span, right? And it's not about when you get old, you see some feeble person with gray hair and hunched over. But if you're regenerating your organs and you're correcting eyesight and skin's beautiful and glowing, right? And you can look like you're 50 when you're 150 and you can walk like you're 50 or 25, whatever the number may be, then that's a different story. And so I think it's wrapping your arms around the fact that, okay, to get to that point, you might be what is it, the movie, the Benjamin Button, right? Like you're aging in reverse, right? And so I think, and would you get bored, right? Who wants to live 200 years? Are you going to have the exact same experience time and time again? What is, I don't know, all crazy questions to even think about. But I think people need to really think about the fact that could you live to scale 100, 120, 150, 200, right? There's people out there talking like it's a real thing right now. And if you are doing it and you're the only person in that camp that's doing it, but everybody else in your ecosystem is not, then who's there with you? Your humanoids and your robots? Or are your loved ones going to be on that same path as you? A lot of ethical questions as you go down that path.
I've heard someone say yesterday that an expert kind of in the space, they said if you can survive the next 10 years, there's a chance that you will live exponentially into longevity escape velocity. Like if you can last for the next 10 years, but at the same time, lots of ethical questions that come up in that. Going back to this idea of scarcity and abundance, what does this mean for us as leaders and families as we approach this idea of human connection in the future, of purpose, of creativity, of time, and what is going to be really important and valuable in the next 10 to 20 years that we need to train our kids to think on, we need to personally think about as leaders? Where does our mind need to shift with all this conversation?
As you said that, my first thought was like, this is all real now. We just have enough things to distract us from actually pouring into it. So to a lot of times I'm negative on some of this stuff, but that to me in some ways sounds positive if that's all we can then focus on, because all of that feeds, I'll just call it a simple thing, it feeds the soul right now, but we get distracted with the chase of all the material things and our work accomplishments and the kids' school accomplishments, and on that chase gets us away oftentimes from human connections. I'm not sure there's going to be pitfalls, but to some level, like if that's all we have left and that's what we have to go pursue, I think that's oftentimes what leaders are trying to find and chase
Get
and
to.
pursue already. But on the time thing, like as you were presenting that, I was thinking to myself about, I was thinking specifically like high school and college. So low stress, just for me, I was fortunate. My parents, they supplied what I needed in that time. Those were the slowest. They're really fun experientially good times. And it was really predominantly about community. I was like around people. And those were the slowest periods of life for me because of the activity I was doing. It was like a lot of very enjoyable things. So, like, when I thought about time in the future, that's probably what is still only 24 hours, but what it feels like, I think it could feel like a lot more time.
Man, if I can make it to the next 10 years and I'm meeting with my financial planner, where does like the we were talking about like life expectancy. Let's drag that out. Where does that go? But everything's gonna be free, so we'll be fine. That point, Jared, of when getting back to basics and waking up and having your coffee and watching the sunrise and watching the sunset. We're all trying to aspire to get to those reveling in the simple things. And to that point, if we yeah, and some people that is leading a full life. Just for those of us who are type A and that are like, no, we gotta struggle, we gotta do something, and we gotta fix everything. That's slowing down. It's at Jared's point. Maybe that's it, and maybe that will be enough. But at what cost from all the other distractions and things that are out there? But the concept of really being able to, yeah, it's 24 hours, but 24 hours when we're on this longevity exodus, who knows? 24 hours could feel like 2 weeks, right?
When you spent 20 or 30 years of going fast and going for the next thing and building and speed and efficiency, my theory is that there is going to be a tremendous amount of despair, depression, and just the soul is going to drop out as we start to lose the things that we've been chasing and those actually start to evaporate, which they will, but at the same time bring abundance, it just won't be from us. We'll be
Mm.
receiving the abundance, but we won't necessarily be the creators of those types of abundance. I just think our sense of purpose and meaning, if we don't work around figuring out who we are, why we're here, why it matters, the value that we want to create inside of our families, what physical presence, emotional presence looks like, we are going to be extremely depressed, extremely suicidal, because the whole concept of the meaning of life is going to just drop out from underneath us. And we actually see this because, like I said, American society has more abundance than any other, I think, country, continent on the planet. And if you look at some of the recent stats, the Americans with zero close friends has gone from 3% to 17%. Weekly time with friends has dropped from 6.5 hours to 4 hours. 30% of young adults are lonely daily. And teens in person time with friends per day has dropped from 140 minutes to 40 minutes. And a 50% increase for dementia from chronic loneliness. You have a lot of these health conditions attached to it. And 20% of teens report persistent loneliness. So some of these stats, just that we as Americans, and I think the world is hungry for connection. They are lonely, they are lost, and we keep them distracted through the chase of those dopamine hits. But I just think we have to completely redefine. I think we have to redefine our entire paradigm on what it means to wake up and go through a day. And that's going to be very difficult for leaders. It's going to be very difficult for families. What would you two say are just for you today? What was one of the unlocks for you of something that you learned or talked about or heard? And what does it inspire you to do differently in your life? As we close out here, what is the unlock today and what does it inspire you to do differently in life?
I said it just a little bit ago, but as you were talking, I was like, these are all the things already: human connection, creativity, uh, the feeling that time is escaping, trying to capture that back. And to me, that ties back mostly to human connection and things that just feel like at a deeper level, like they're bringing satisfaction. More time in those things makes the time feel less wasted, or it elongates the time. So I think the unlock for me today, and this kind of started with my question at the front end, which is, okay, so what today, right? So this is coming and it's going to get accelerated. First, how do I focus on those things more? How do I get them in better proportion in the rest of my life? And then how do I encourage others, starting primarily within my family, but then also in the workplace, preparing people for these ideas that, hey, this stuff really matters, and encouraging them to spend that time with family, prioritizing that, reorienting their purpose and value and meaning in life around these things, with the potential that within our lifetimes, still a question mark, right, of the pace of all of this, but within our lifetimes, this could be something that we really have to face. And to your point, Andy, like this is, I think, more poignant for American society and other Western societies compared to places that don't have as much abundance. I think the shift would actually be easier. So trying to do it now, right? Looking at these things, focusing on these things, and putting more priority and intention around one, pursuing them, and two, figuring out like how that then manifests to replace the purpose that comes out of showing up to a job every day and other things that may dissipate over time.
Yeah, for me, it unlocks the future is now. The question you asked us in the beginning is what are we reflecting on? And it is about what does the future hold for me personally and now just for society in general. And I think, ironically enough, this conversation has inspired me, and I've done it before, but has inspired me to really unplug. I find myself constantly in this element of trying to be customer driven and response driven and always checking my email or scrolling social media. And it I took a hiatus from social media last year, and it was one of the best like couple of months. Just there's you for whatever reason, I just felt distracted and I wasn't present in my life. When you're at dinner with friends, why does the phone have to be on the table? Right. Or with your family, or when you have these moments of just truly not being tethered to your device, I feel like it's going to get me prepared to really be one with not having to constantly be checking for an email or a notification or somebody needing me, because my AI bot is going to be handling all my emails before 9 a.m. before I get to the office, right? And the way where we get all of this technology to work for us, we need to figure out what we're going to do and how life is going to work for us moving forward. Very thought provoking and really just a lot of good stuff and a lot of change is happening. And I'm glad we're a part of it. It's scary, it's exciting, and I'm here to see where we go.
For me, I think about my kids and how I talk to them about the future. If you look at the data, most people don't have a positive outlook on the future in America. In other countries, in China and Asia and some other countries, actually, people have a way more positive outlook on the future than we do. And I think it's the way we talk about some of this technology and the way we doomsday it. And I think having my kids watch the Artemis spaceship and having them see how big the universe is, I want them to see awe and wonder in the world and that there is so much beauty to explore and exciting things ahead, and that they have the power and potential to create in the future beauty and goodness and love and life. And I want them to be excited about that. I want them to see that the future is hopeful. I want them to be wise as they approach that. But at the same time, I don't want to put my own fears on my kids around what I think will happen when they are going to have their own generation to figure everything out, like we in our generation figured everything out from the Great Depression of our grandparents and parents and all that stuff. And I just really want to empower them and get them excited and help them dream bigger than they've ever dreamed about commercial flights to space, about working in space, around all of these exciting things that, because if I can unlock passion and play and excitement inside of my kids, they will want to create out of joy. And I think that's really the future of creation is out of joy and purpose, not out of performance or a paycheck. I think that's going to be the unlock.